Today we're speaking with Brice Fenton. My fellow New Hampshire resident is running for U.S. Senate here in this upcoming election. In this conversation, we talk about the fourth turning. There's a lot of epic chaos going on and epic change in the world today. And Brice Fenton is uniquely positioned to talk about many of the points that are going on between the changing demographics, the world changing order, the definition of what money is, the rising of Bitcoin, really the effects that we're starting to see across the globe. And we also take a minute to talk to small business entrepreneurs about this new thing that I had never heard about called regulation crowdfunding, or Reg CF, where small business owners can sell parts of their business, equity in their business without losing control, which plays a big factor into our Entrepreneurs United mission and vision. Please welcome to this episode my fellow New Hampshire resident, Brice Fenton. Brice, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast. Quick little story. About a year or so ago, I started doing research, about a year and a half maybe, started doing research on cryptocurrency and started learning a little bit more about Bitcoin, all these different things. And I think I found you maybe on Clubhouse. And I was like, oh, this guy seems interesting. I want to learn more about him. And then I come to find out that you live right down the street from me in New Hampshire. I was like, I got to get this guy on the Entrepreneurs United podcast. So here we are a year and a half later. Excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Great to be here. Thanks a lot for having me.
Absolutely. And, I know you got a lot of things going on. You have the Satoshi Roundtable, you have Chainstone Labs that you're also the managing director of, but something a little bit more important maybe on the horizon right now. You're running for Senate here in New Hampshire. Can you tell us a little bit more about that ride and what led you to that decision, and maybe a little bit more about the other operations you have going on as well?
Yeah. Well, like you said, I have a lot of different business interests. Watchdog Capital is an SEC registered broker dealer that we own. I've been in the crypto space for a while. The run for office, I've always been interested in politics since I was a teenager. I've volunteered on a lot of campaigns and been an activist. And I thought, in the back of my mind, at some point I might run. I really did not think it was going to be now. And earlier this year, when I had a group of friends trying to convince me to jump into this race, I told them, I don't mean to be rude, but just please stop asking. There's no way I'm going to do it. But as I thought about it more, I felt like I have to, because the world is in such a crazy place and it's a very winnable race, and I could actually make a difference, and somebody needs to. We need to make a difference because our world is in such a crazy place, and it's either going to go the right way or the wrong way. And there's a lot of forces trying to drag it the wrong way. So I felt like I had to. So I jumped on in, and it's been great ever since. I mean, it's been a neat learning experience. I'm reaching a lot of people, and I've got a heck of a chance at winning in this thing. So it's great.
That's awesome. Well, love to learn a little bit more about that. Before we do, walk us back. You seem to be very entrepreneurial. Where did these roots come from? And talk to us a little bit about your history. Like, where did you develop your entrepreneurial roots? Tell us a little bit, maybe more about the Watchdog Capital and Chainstone Labs. Like, what exactly did that come from?
Yeah, so I had a unique career path. I started in the brokerage business at like age 8 and 9.
Oh, wow.
And the reason I did that is my mom was a broker. She was a single mom. She was working as a waitress, and she needed a higher income. So somebody very wise told her to get into sales. So she got into sales and she started selling microwave ovens. And then she worked her way up into selling insurance. And then she became an investment salesperson. And I grew up on the floor of a brokerage firm. Every day after school, I would go to my mom's office, and I was a little kid, and I'd play with the pink sheets of stocks, because those were what I understood were cheap stocks. And I would invest a little bit of money, $20, $30, this kind of thing. And I'd play with the computer. And so I got a real early start. And then when I was 14, I got kind of a real job there, stuffing envelopes and you were allowed to make phone calls on behalf of the professionals back then. They phased that out later. But when I was that age, you were allowed to at age 14, 15, 16. And then I worked at a law firm for a little while, but then I got back into the investment business. I went into the Navy. And then when I come back, I went back to that business that I had learned all those years ago. And I've been in it ever since. So 29 years I've been in the finance business, and I've sort of done everything in it. I've worked with small clients and huge clients and deca billionaires, and traveled all over the world and done business all over the world. And it's been a really cool ride, and I've specialized in trends and what's new and what's different, whether it's cryptocurrency or the changes in Dubai a decade and a half ago, or the internet, before that, or whatever. I've always been kind of trying to be at the cutting edge of new trends and new things.
Got it. And so that's Watchdog Capital. Is that correct? Is that your
Yeah,
brokerage
that's well,
business?
that's more my overall career. Watchdog is a newer company a few years ago,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean that's kind of, that's part of it. That's my overall career, working at a few different companies over the last 30 years.
Gotcha. This may segue us right into why everything's a mess, but we're obviously coming out of this, COVID pandemic where, the government printed trillions of dollars. Inflation's hitting us, interest rates are going up. There's a lot of stuff going on. And if I just stick on the financial side of things for a minute, which I know a lot of entrepreneurs that we work with are kind of, okay, is a recession coming? Is it not coming? Should I tighten up? What's going on here? And maybe that kind of ties a little bit into, where is ultimately this going with, new technologies and blockchain technologies, where cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, there's a whole bunch of different things going on. That's a big loaded question. If I don't even know how to ask you, what is going on in this financial markets? What's your opinion, and where do you think we're headed here?
Well, the most important thing, there's two big things that are wrong in what's going on right now. And that one is that the politicians have broken the money. It's broken. It's not real money anymore. It's a scam. They broke it. And there's sound principles of economics that make money. And it's not that you just print something with people's photos on it who you respect and you call it money and give it to your cronies. That's not real money. So one is that they've broken the money, and two is that there's powers of centralization and tyranny and centralized control. And both of those things are being fixed by this broad revolution of, Bitcoin with money, and then overall decentralization as well with kind of the broader cypherpunk movement and, some aspects of crypto, the broader crypto space. There's some negatives and some scamminess and some low quality projects, but the overall ideals of decentralizing and eliminating centralized power are really productive. So yeah, I mean that's what we're going through, and more broadly, if you zoom out even further than that, we're in a fourth turning. We're in a time of epic change when everything changes. Our world is changing. In these kind of times, which happen every 100 years or so, everything changes. Borders change, money changes, who people trust changes, everything changes. And that's what we're going through right now. And Bitcoin and money and decentralization and crypto is a part of that. And the old broken legacy systems are part of that. This phony thing that they call money is part of it. So yeah, it's a big story. It's an epic time to be alive. It's an exciting time to be alive, and it's a time of great change.
Yeah, so I watched to point of view you just made there, the World Changing Order, 45-minute YouTube video by Dalio. Is that what you
Yeah,
mean when you talk about the fourth turning?
sort of. And I think it might go a different way than he thinks. I think he sees the problem for sure, 100%, and he articulates it better than almost anybody. But I think he thinks we're going to have another big bailout. Many of the things that he's indicated, this is going to be, another Jubilee year, and everybody's going to just get to wrap everything up and go home. And that works until it doesn't. You can't just keep because ultimately these things, these bailouts and stuff, are done on the backs of the people, and eventually, especially when people start having their kids be hungry or they can't afford to fill up their tank, people start to ask questions and say, what's up with this? And they may not tolerate it. So the money might just break completely. But more broadly, yeah, the fourth turning is more like that term comes from Strauss and Howe, who wrote a book by that name. But it's a common kind of idea that every 100 years or so, we go through these fourth turnings, these times of epic change when everything changes. And it's in their theory mostly driven by demographics. So as people get older, power structures change. The 50s are distinctly different from the 80s. The 80s are different from today. Times change, people change. There's whole decades where people are very conservative and decades where people are very liberal and different social ideas. And then every once in a while, they're really big. Religions change, how people think change, completely different ideas. Cotton increased Mather and Cotton Mather were, the idea that you had control of your own destiny was a thing. I mean, there was a time for hundreds of years, the idea that if you work hard, you'll do better, or if you're doing well in these things, it's going to help you study hard, you'll be smarter. That was a novel concept. It was like, what? It was like the ultimate self-help thing at the time. So, and then these things then it's like now, I mean, of course, hopefully little kids know that now, like work hard, you'll do well. Like, yeah. But there was a time when that was a novel concept. So you have these ideas that spread. and the world changes as a result, whether it's the advent of the printing press or the American and French revolutions, or this era, which is marked by, at its beginning, with the internet and the falling apart of fake money and new forms of decentralization and power. So it's really exciting and epic, and nobody alive has seen it. This doesn't happen that often. It happens quite often in history, but it's usually every 100 years or so.
Brice, what do you say to people who are listening who have never heard this type of angle, who might go, boy, Brice, you're saying some fanatical stuff, broken money, tyranny, central control, every 100 years, here we are. Like, what happened to just put money in the market, dollar cost average? Things generally go up, they go down, they come up. Trust the system, go work and put money in your 401k. What's wrong with doing that, Brice?
Well, you can, but you do have to recognize that the world does change, and these epic shifts do happen. That book was written in the 90s, 96, and they predicted that around now we would have something. They didn't predict what would be the pin that popped the bubble. In this case, the final bubble, I mean, I think it began in 2008 with the radical printing of new money, and then most recently over the last couple of years with the politician reaction to COVID. And I make a distinction. It wasn't COVID that closed down the businesses. It was politicians' reaction. But that's a big deal. If I was on your program 3 years ago and I said, hey, in 3 years, you're going to have a doctor who shuts down half the country and you're going to need a movement pass and the president's going to tell you need an injection and people are going to be wearing a mask and they're going to make your kids wear a mask and 20% of the leading voices, including the president of the United States, are not going to be available on wide social media because of mass, big tech censorship and on. You would have been and they're going to print 80% of the new money. They're going to print more money than they've ever printed in the history of money. They're going to print it in the next year. You would have thought I was nuts. And so these things create nth order effects. And that's why we see what's happening in Ukraine. That's why, food supply shortages, supply chain issues, baby formula, medical, employment issues, companies not being able to find workers. It just breaks and breaks and breaks and nth order, and it's not going to stop now. We're in a time of crazy chaos right now. Like it or not, we're in this. This is not normal times. It's not 1996. We can't use those rules. Those rules I grew up with, subtract your age from 100, put that much in bonds and the rest in stocks and put it in your 401k, split it between large cap growth, small cap growth, large cap international, growth value, little bit of gold, whoop-de-doo. Those days are gone. That ship has sailed. The pre-2019 world is gone, and it's never, ever going to return again. And everybody who based rules on that and everything we learned growing up, it's all gone. It's out the window. It's as irrelevant as the horse and carriage was to people in my grandfather's generation who grew up not seeing an engine and found themselves fighting on the fields of France with airplanes flying overhead and mustard gas being dropped on them. Boom, the world changed overnight. And that's what we're in right now. It's happening right now before our eyes, undoubtedly. Undoubtedly, we're in a fourth turning. I mean, look at it. Look at the world. It's crazy. And it's not just a normal fourth turning, in my opinion. It's a big one. It's an epic one. And it's like, I mean, talk about, you want me to really go out there? I think it's like a rising of a new religion, really. And unfortunately, a bad religion in some ways. There's a lot of centralized control that's very fanatical about locking people down and locking their human rights. And they're complete with their own sort of versions of high priests. They call them scientists. And scientists are talking about everything now. They want to run your company, how your board works. They're in everything. So it is quite epic times that we're in, and this Ukraine is not going to be the final chapter. We can expect more and more chaos. Unfortunately, there's a high chance of real serious global geopolitical turmoil and war. It's likely that China will invade Taiwan, for example. There's all kinds of crazy things that can happen. And I mean, look at the economics. There's going to be an economic price for this. We may have a Great Depression or, radical hyperinflation or any number of other things. So not to be a pessimist. I mean, it's a great time for building too. It's a great time to do cool stuff because we can write our own future. And, people who seize this opportunity are going to be able to write the future in the way that we want. So it's exciting times to try and do new things.
I have a two-part question. The first part is asking you about where's the safe bet, not money-wise, just generally, how things are trending. Where's the safe bet that you're really confident on how things are going to go? and then where's your hunch? My follow-up question is going to be, where's the opportunity in that for entrepreneurs? So to start with on the first part of the question, what do you feel really confident about on the trends as you see them today that you go, hey, I'm a solid 80%. Here's where I see things going. And then what do you have 50-50 on?
Yeah, as an investor, I always like to be conservative. Risk management is one of the most important things as an investor. And in times of uncertainty, which is, often, but especially now, because right now, the scenario that I'm painting can lead to, serious chaos. So then you'd be, much more of the kind of stuff that we're seeing now, food shortages and things like that. So trying to pick businesses that are in line with those things where they're good businesses either way, and maybe they do a little bit better if we have more of this chaos, rather than a business that might do worse. Like I would probably be cautious of certain luxury brand kind of thing, something that's going to drop off fast if the economy continues, crazy shakiness. And if you have two businesses that are both doing the same revenue, and one of them sells kind of luxury goods and one of them sells, survival knives, and they both have the same growth rate, I'd probably go with the survival knife company, or something like that. Things that might benefit, something, for example, a company that does their own manufacturing in upstate New York or something like that, or people who control their own supply chain. And personally, so as far as one good bet is to control your own personal supply chain. Have a system where you're planning for multiple scenarios. I like real estate. Even in a world where everything melts down, real estate's still real estate. It's worth something to somebody. It's not zero. And I would stay away from kind of the opposite of real estate, would be something like some of these DeFi projects, from the crypto industry. They're just sort of extremely fluff. Nobody's going to be sitting there if the world kind of has this chaos, and I hope it'll be, maybe it'll be a period of chaos followed by something better. But either way, we run the risk of, big economic issues. Nobody's going to be sitting there saying, "Oh, I really wish I had my token." It's going to be more about good, real businesses, goods and services, things people want. Food, and this doesn't have to be a doom and gloom scenario. If you believe that the economy is going to do great, all the more better. You can adjust your business model or something like that as well. So yeah, I think that kind of answers both parts, I hope.
Yeah, it does somewhat. I'm hearing where things will go, maybe more chaos. So
yeah,
look at businesses that do better in chaos and they may thrive in it, and look at businesses that own their own supply chain, or as much of what they do for an ultimate product as possible, so they can't be controlled from the ebbs and flows of other powers to be out there. Where is the global opportunity for the average entrepreneur? Somebody who's running something either locally in their business, maybe regionally, and they're looking to grow. They're excited about their business. They see a runway to it, but the landscape's changing. Where's the opportunity for that person?
Rich, real quick though, when you said globally, did you mean holistically, or did you mean like physically, like geographically globally?
Geographically. So not someone who runs a national company or a global company. The average entrepreneur is doing something in their community or their region, and they'd like to grow. They'd like to bring on more staff. They'd like to sell more of their service or product. They want to take care of their people. How does what the environment is ahead of us, how does that serve the person? Where's the opportunity for the average entrepreneur?
Like that.
Yeah, I think that some of the best opportunities are taking old businesses and kind of reinventing them for a new era. Because in this, I'm very convinced about this sort of fourth turning philosophy. I think that we are definitely in times of epic change, and everything gets displaced. Power structures. You have kind of the World Economic Forum and the Clinton Global Initiative, and CNN sort of New York Times represents kind of like old powers. And then you have like TikTok and Joe Rogan and nobody ever heard of TikTok. Again, 3 years ago, if I said Joe Rogan was going to beat CNN, you would have thought I was nuts. You barely maybe knew who he was. You would have been like, what, the UFC guy? He has a podcast, like, whatever. Oh yeah, I guess he's a good podcaster, and you would have never even known what TikTok was or Clubhouse or Spaces, so you have these entirely new things. And the old powers, it's like, I remember it was interesting, when you were quoted by somebody like the New York Times or Forbes, it was a big deal. You'd get the article framed, you'd put it I'd put it in my resume. Brice Fenton quoted by Forbes. You can write for Forbes now. You got Forbes sites, like anybody can, it's no big deal at all. Nobody cares. And I remember also being on television was a very big deal. And people would, like, being on Time Magazine was the ultimate, like, wow, they've really, really made it there on time. Nobody cares anymore. Everything is different now. You can hire your own film crew, and there's kids who are influencers who have 20 million views on their content. So I think that is an exciting time to take, again, being conservative. I like to take working models, like, that people are always going to eat. They're always going to do entertainment, for example, and you can go into the new models. So you look and say, well, how can you do something that was done before? So we have that baseline. For me, it's the investment business. Some industries say, okay, this is an industry that's been around in one form or another for a long time. Entertainment, food delivery, investments, services. There's certain things that are just kind of always around. And say, how can we reinvent that for a new world, a more decentralized world, and a world that's taking advantage of some of these new technologies. If you're really bold and really creative, you try and spearhead that and be the new technology. So the next step, big brain Giga Chad would be to go and say, all right, what's happening in the world and what are these powers going to look like when it falls apart? These old powers just aren't going to be around. The big banks and stuff, they're just not going to be as important. The new rising powers are going to displace them. So you can look forward to that and say, okay, what does a world look like once all these news agencies kind of fall apart? How are people going to aggregate podcasts, or, how are they going to get information? And you look forward to that, and then you build some sort of solution. And, that's harder to do. I've thought of a few. I mean, one thing that I'm looking at with our firm is, for an example, is a new way to do home loans. So we're licensed to do equities. So you can do like a Reg CF crowdfunding, as a broker. And we thought, instead of doing a home loan where you go to a bank, you buy a $500,000 home, you put $100,000 down, you borrow the other $4, why not put $100,000 down towards equity and then sell the other 400,000 equity, and you can sell it to your friends or family or a Japanese billionaire or whoever wants to buy it. And then instead of paying a mortgage back to the bank, you buy the equity back from those people, or you have a market, or they just own it. There's all kinds of cool things. I love equity. So there's things like that. I mean, just personally, that's an example of a business that I've thought of where I'm like, yeah, that could work. And if credit dries up, we may be the only game in town. People be like, oh, I can't get a loan. There's no more credit. I can't go to a bank. I can go to Bruce's crazy thing with this equity deal, and it costs the same, and the metrics work the same, and then it could create a whole new market. And so those are the kind of things that I'm excited about. Those are the best pitches that I see, I think.
I love it, Bruce. And what you're talking about too is just being disrupting old industries or old ways of doing things, which we all know are going to go away. No one uses fax machines anymore. Pagers are out. Things are happening at such a rapid pace.
John, we don't have our Nextels, by the way.
We don't have Nextels anymore. But I think entrepreneurs, they really need to look internally to their own business and what they should be evolving and moving forward in their own business if they want to keep it. But then if you're looking at businesses, I love, you're spot on. One thing I heard recently too, and you mentioned it earlier, was everything really starts with demographics. The demographics are just changing. And, I heard something the other day in one episode, I think it was 60 Minutes. I was hearing how we're short $4 million homes in the United States. And then when I listened to somebody else who was on the demographic side, they're like, we don't need to build one more home in the United States, because as the baby boomers go, there's not enough people to buy their homes.
Right.
But so the demographics are really going to lead things, if you will, monetarily, what they're purchasing, how they're viewing things, how they're learning, all those types of things. I have one quick question. You had mentioned a book that was written a few years ago. Was it called Epic Change?
No, Fourth Turning by
that's
Strauss
the book.
and
Okay.
Howe.
So the Fourth Turning is the book. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
I want to take a look at that. So I want to walk a little bit more to, not providing financial advice here, but, a business owner listening to this episode is making some money And it's like, wait a minute, if I listen to this episode, I should just stash my cash under my mattress or do, what do I, now he's telling me this cash isn't worth anything anymore. Oh my gosh, what am I doing? I don't expect you to be Michael Saylor here, but can you make the case for why you think Bitcoin might be it? Or if it's not Bitcoin, what should people be doing with their money right now?
Yeah, I can definitely make the case for Bitcoin. And the way to do that is I always ask people, what is money? We all work for money and we all know what money we have. And most of us spend a great deal of time and energy thinking about what money is, but a lot of people can't really define it unless you really think about it. What makes good money money? And fortunately, even prior to Bitcoin existing, this is kind of a thing that had been figured out. And there are properties that money has. And if you Google it, you'll come up with it. It's got to be divisible. It's got to be acceptable. You have to be accepted at different places. It's got to be divisible. That's why those big wheels that the Yap Island weren't a good form of money. It's got to be durable. That's why steak and wheat, even though it's valuable. I mean, I love a good steak, but I don't want to get paid in steak. It's got to be durable. It's got to, that's why gold is good money. It's got to be fungible, uniform. So my money's got to equal your money. Limited in supply. So if you go to the principles of what I would encourage everybody, first, exercise. Close your eyes, ask yourself, what is money and why is money money? Second exercise, go and Google it. Then you'll see those 6 properties. And then figure out how the dollar stacks up. And then look into Bitcoin and say, how does Bitcoin stack up? And I'll tell you right now, Bitcoin stacks up quite well in many of those, particularly limited supply. That's what got me on it. You have unlimited supply versus limited supply. You have an asset that people want that is limited, and you have unlimited asset over here called fiat that they can just print from thin air with wild abandon and zero accountability. That's not money. It's not money, and it's never been money. And no matter how high up the people are on their high horse, and the tyrant saying, this is money, well, good luck. They tried that in Zimbabwe. They tried that in the Weimar Republic. Politicians don't have the power to say something's money. They're scammers. Just because they say it's money doesn't mean it's money. It has to have those properties. Otherwise, humans will do what they're doing right now with Bitcoin and what they've done throughout human history. It's called the Cantillon effect. They're going to move towards the money that's more sound and more stable and more acceptable. And they've done it again and again throughout human history. And Bitcoin is a better form of money because the current form of money is really junk right now. They've really kind of dropped the bottom out of the scam on it, printing it from thin air and giving it to cronies. They gave $500 billion to one company, right? Because of COVID, $500 billion to BlackRock. So that's not real money. That's just a phony thing that people are rewarding their cronies with. And the game's up. They have such a big weight. It's just like the New York Times. They have so much built up from 100 years of reputation that they can fall quite far and still be sort of on top of the world, but only until you can't.
Yeah, it's interesting. Back to when I listened to The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio, he talked about, used to be the British pound. That used to be the money. And then it became the US dollar. It's been over generations and generations, right? Every 100 years or so, there's a different currency that's leading. And the piece that really got me, Bruce, was, when I learned more about what was going on with currency was that, you could probably tell the story a lot better, but at one point, the US currency was backed by gold, period.
Right.
You have gold, you have dollars. You don't have the gold, it's not backed by, and so what ended up happening is they basically unlatched that process of being backed by anything. And so right now, currency is not backed by really anything. And then you could just decide to print as many as you want, which, when you read these 6 things, divisible, acceptable, durable, fungible, limited, that's actually 5. I might be missing one.
I don't know, which one did I miss? I got to Google it.
Doesn't matter. Either way, the one part that I think is the problem is that limited supply, to your point. I think that's what caught your attention as well. So let me come back to really the root of this, though, because I asked you to make the case for Bitcoin. But let me come back to, I got money. What am I doing right now? Again, not financial advice, but what would you recommend someone do? Because it seems like I'm getting paid in US dollars, and that's not good. And wherever I go, the market may tank. And what should I be doing?
Hey, John, before he answers that, and I want to come back to it, I thought it'd be funny. I just went back in my file cabinet there. You see what that says right now?
Oh, yeah. There you go. Beautiful. I love those.
It says a silver certificate on the dollar. and this is a dollar that was printed, I think in 57.
Silver certificate.
And obviously at this time, the dollars don't say silver certificate because they're not backed by silver. So that's number one that I think is interesting about what you were talking about, John. And then Brice, you talked about Zimbabwe. Take a look at this bill.
Oh, nice. I'm glad you had one. I was just looking around. I don't have it with me, but yeah.
This is my $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe. If you look it up on the internet, I want to say when I bought it, it was a high value. I think it was like 51 cents.
Yeah, exactly. And that's proof positive that politicians can't make money. I mean, it's a total scam. Like, oh, look at this thing that we printed on a fancy printer and it's got this respectable person on it. That's not money. It's a scam.
Is this where we're headed, Brice?
What's that?
Is this where we're headed? $100 trillion of U.S. money is 51 cents of what it used to be?
We're going down what Frederick Hayek called the road to serfdom in his book by that name, The Road to Serfdom. He was an Austrian and he saw this happen. They printed in the Weimar Republic. Same thing, the same thing as what we have now. They print money from thin air, and eventually you have to have a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread. And before that, the loaf of bread doubles and triples, which is what we're seeing now, just like the gasoline prices. You print, and then what are they going to do to try and fix it? They're going to print more money from thin air. And eventually you see what's happening now where they like rats on a ship, they know it's sinking. So they're like, oh boy, it's done now. It's toast. Let me get 500 billion from my buddies at BlackRock. And they're just seizing, they're not even having accountability anymore. And what happened, what you referenced when we went off the gold standard in 1971, everything broke. The minute they didn't need accountability, they had an empty checkbook that they could print from thin air. Everything broke. Drugs got worse, poverty got worse, crime got worse, everything broke. Budgets went out of control. There's charts, there's a website called WTF happened in 1971, and it has chart after chart after chart of all these crazy hockey sticks, because once you took away the accountability with real money, it's accountable. With its gold or Bitcoin or the old dollar, it's accountable. You can't just print it from thin air. But once they gave themselves the ability to print it from thin air, we saw a never-ending war. Way more spent on war in the last 50 years than were spent in World War II and World War I combined. We spent more in Afghanistan than we spent in World War II because no accountability. In World War II, they had to come to you and make a case. If they had podcasts back then, they would have had a war hero on the podcast. Say, hey, please give war bonds. We need your money to help and help fight the Japanese who invaded our shores at Pearl Harbor. And the people, they had to convince you. They don't need to convince you now. They print from thin air, and they don't need to even make a case. They'll just print for whatever they feel like it and give it to whatever special interest or cronies or businesses, contractors they feel like. That's how it's broken, and it's not sustainable. It's going to be just like Zimbabwe.
So I'm curious to circle back around to John's question. Apologize for hopping in there, John. So the average bear is making money in U.S. currency today, and they want to do something smart with it, I think is where you were going, John. Like, what are they supposed to do?
Yeah, I'd look at the defensive kind of businesses, being defensive with your own planning, having savings, trying to, just be prepared for shakiness, and looking into what industries you have. I like equity in real businesses, although a lot of the regular publicly traded businesses are quite overvalued. If you can get ideally, I'd like to see more opportunities for people to buy high cash producing small businesses, good smaller businesses, which you can't buy right now too easily. It's harder. It's making it easier. There's some technical and regulatory advances that's making that easier. Like I say, real estate. I do like Bitcoin. I think that people should, if they understand it and they believe, you got to start with those principles. What is money, and understand it. And if you really believe in it and you can kind of hold for the long term, and you understand that it's volatile in the term, then I think some Bitcoin can be appropriate for a lot of investors. And then also, doubling down on yourself, whatever your niche is, whatever you're good at, whatever your unique way of who you are and how you monetize things, that's sometimes the best investment, because if you know your industry, you know yourself, you can leverage that with capital. And that's how, some of the greatest fortunes are made, as well as a lot of the, plain old wealthy folks,
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things there, Brice. One is I just want to come back to it. If Rich, I don't know if you've seen that WTF happened in
No, I
1971.com
took a
website.
note on it though.
Just type in WTF 1971, anybody that's listening, and go look at that, and you'll be overwhelmed with what Brice was talking about in terms of in 1971 everything broke across the board. It's pretty clear through those charts, and it's very well known kind of theory that there's a problem coming in that vein. But Brice, you just brought up something. You shared an idea with us that I thought was awesome and very creative regarding mortgages and equities and everything else. You said, I love equity. And then you just said, I wish there was a way to buy smaller companies. And, part of here at Entrepreneurs United, what we talk about is how you can grow your business, get access to capital, get liquidity for what you own in a business. And a lot of small owners, their liquidity and all of their net worth is tied up in their business. And it's really hard for them to get out without selling a majority share of their business and losing control and all those other things. What would you think about a business idea of having a mutual fund of small businesses? Is that a viable business?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, this is something I'm really passionate about, and it's something that I do with Watchdog Capital. We do reg crowdfunding. So reg crowdfunding was part of the Jobs Act under Obama, and then it was improved just last March. And it went from $1 million to $5 million. And what it says now is that you can raise up to $5 million per year from unaccredited investors, and you can solicit. So a lot of the big rules with exemptions. So the only way to raise money for stocks in the US, you either have to register as a publicly traded company like Tesla, which costs $1 million and takes years, or you have to do it under an exemption like Reg A or Reg D, or this newer one called Reg CF. So Reg CF is one of the cooler ones because it's great for small businesses because you can, and remember, if you can raise 5 million, that you could be $1 billion business. As long as 5 million is useful to you, you don't have to be small. Raising 5 million is enough for most businesses. And don't forget, you can do it again the next year or the next year and the next year. So even a good size, even if you're a $200 million business, I would still recommend. I mean, there's a $1 billion business who doesn't need the money at all that I'm friends with. And I've been trying to get them to do one solely because it'll bring on more people onto their their shareholder base. And I think it's a nice thing for businesses. If you're a small consumer facing business, you can have your customers be your owners, whether you're a small restaurant or you're a consulting business, or I wish I could tell you. There's one we're working on right now. It's a really cool business. But one thing that's cool about it is that they make their business with like several hundred customers who are, I don't want to say too much more about it, but they have a good base of people who are going to want to invest in this business. So, and that could be for anything. Could be a car wash, could be a computer consulting company, could be a DeFi startup, could be a 80-year-old pharmacy, whatever. If you're a business, you should have a fair value based on what it is, and you can sell to your people. And that could be your friends, family, your neighbors, your employees, and it gives liquidity to those owners. So what I would like to see, Reg CF and the legal and technical improvements are one help. Tokenizing is another help because then you can move the equity around. So those two things will enable us to have hopefully thousands and thousands of, I'd like to see a world where everybody, all kinds of businesses and all kinds of assets, not just businesses. It could be a piece of property, real estate, tokenized, and you sell the equity. So people have equity. They say, okay, I own 1% of that building downtown, and I own 0.5% of my favorite Indian food restaurant, and then also people can adjust. I would give a much more fair valuation to my comic book store because I'm a geek and I think it's fun, and I would love to put a few grand into owning part of my comic book store. And I'm going to be a very forgiving investor. I'm not going to be like, numbers. I'm doing it because I like it. So you could have cap tables reflect the mission of the business, even sort of public benefit companies, or, there's different business models. There's a lot of restaurants, for example, where they have lunches for free for homeless people, things like that. And you can have investors that share that mission. So I love the idea of Reg CFs. I'd like to see it be even easier. And then the next step, even better, I'd like to see all those things traded. So you have ATSs and stuff. You could have businesses just trade, and you could go into your favorite restaurant or your local whatever business, and you could buy pieces of that, and there'd even be a liquid market. And then for owners, as you guys know, a lot of businesses that are nice, good businesses, the owner gets older and the business kind of dies. They sort of just work less, and the revenue goes down, and then eventually they shut the doors. And that's a shame. Even as a little kid, I always thought that the first business I saw close like that, I said, that doesn't seem right. That has value. Even as a little kid, I was 8 years old and I just didn't, my parents told me this business and I said, that just doesn't feel right. And and they said, well, the owner's retiring and nobody wanted to buy it. And I'm like, it's not worth zero. If I knew the term non-zero at age 8, I would have used that term, you know, and so to be able to sell part of your business off and distribute that cap table, I think that's awesome. I think equity is one of the greatest inventions in the history of economics. So, why not use it more?
Yeah, I mean, whew, I think you just, blew my mind, let alone maybe all the entrepreneurs listening going, wait a minute. So you're saying that I can just sell $5 million per year of equity in my business, which gives me liquidity as an owner. But I'm assuming a couple of things. One is they need to know who these investors are, which may be a tough spot to be in. Like some people don't know who these people are. But then secondly, you need to get a fair market value for your company first before you can actually go do it. And then thirdly, I'm assuming that this would be a different class of shares, so they don't lose control of their business. Is that correct, or it needs to be the same class of shares in the Reg CF?
You could do all kinds of different securities things. I recommend the same class of shares. So the would be a valuation. By the way, this is what my company does. I could, Watchdog Capital does this, so I could introduce them to the team over there. And there's other platforms. I don't want to just shill ours. There's a lot of other. This is a good thing. You do. Ironically, it helps me, but as a candidate and as a liberty person, I don't want a law that protects me. But ironically, the law says you have to go through somebody like us. You have to go through somebody who's licensed with FINRA, either as a registered portal or as a broker dealer like we are. I actually, even though that helps us immensely, I would like to get rid of those laws. I don't believe in those kind of laws that make it so that if you could have to go somebody who's licensed as a broker dealer and they're a New Hampshire farmer and a veteran, wonderful. That's great for me. But those aren't really fair laws. So I would prefer if you didn't even have that requirement. But whatever, the law's the law. You do have to go through a registered portal, and there's a number of them, including ours. But and then you come up with a valuation, and it varies. Obviously, a restaurant's going to have a different valuation metric than a high tech startup. But you try and get a fair valuation, which you can set. I mean, you can have an ice cream store that does $100,000 in revenue and you can say it's worth $1 billion. I mean, it's just a matter of whether somebody will accept it or whether everybody believes that. So, but you set the price, ideally a fair price, so if it's a $100,000 ice cream place, maybe your valuation is a few $100,000 or something. And then you say how much you want to raise. I want to raise X dollars at X valuation. I want to raise $1 million at a $10 million valuation. So I'm going to sell 10% of the company, and they can figure that into there, whether they want to give up the control or not. And by the way, it's not necessarily a bad thing to give up control, especially if it's over time and especially if it's done in a way that you like. The ideal way to do it is little by little. So you get some shareholders, and usually shareholders don't have that much influence in and of themselves. If they all get together and vote, that can matter more. But if you have the majority, in most small businesses, you would, you have a, whatever kind of business you could be. If it's more of a slow growth business, then it's going to be a lower valuation. But if it's more like, high growth or high growth potential, it could be a higher valuation, and you sell a piece of that, very much like a venture round. And I recommend this for, old school businesses. And the neat thing about it with venture rounds, there's only a very small type of business that they will look at. And I know some great business. As a financial advisor, some of my wealthiest clients had the most boring goofball business. They're like, they make ball bearing grease or something like that. And believe me, they're living just as well as any celebrity. They're making millions and millions of dollars. You guys know how it is. Some of the most exciting businesses money wise, it's these crazy, they make corrugated box packing, and they've just dominated some little niche. They make all the horse harnesses for all the horses in America, or some crazy thing like that. And a lot of these are really profitable businesses, but VCs aren't interested in that because they don't want to see a business that says, oh, we cornered the aluminum can recycling market for New Jersey, and we're pulling down 2.5 million a year every single year for the last 9 years. That's a great business. I'd love to own that business. But a VC doesn't want that. They want something that's going to give them a 30x.
Yeah.
So you can match up your equity, your cap table with people who share your vision or who want that kind of business. You say, yeah, I want fat cash flow, or I want to take a crazy risk, or I don't even mind making that much money because I love this comic book store so much. I want to support them, and I'm totally cool with them just keeping it even story in business. So you can adjust. So you end up ideally over time, you're giving control to people who share your vision. And let's face it, we all, time marches on for all of us. Eventually, some of us, presumably we want to have an exit.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to just wait, you're 67 and you decide you want to exit by age 69. If you've already sold a little bit over time, you've gotten some liquidity, you built the business, and also you professionalized the business because you've had hopefully stakeholders over the years who are like, hey, I want a good accounting report or whatever. You professionalize the business, and then your favorite shareholder might be your employee. So you say, all right, I'm going to sell you the last 20% now, and then another 20% over the next 3 years, and I'm out. Again, it's for your exit and all along the process, it's really a good, equity is just a great tool, and it's underused for small businesses because of the paperwork and all the hassles. But the good news is that's changing. We're going to make this a lot easier so you can do it without spending $100,000 on lawyers, every time.
Yeah, that's great. I think you're speaking right to the small business owner's heart, right? Which is, I spent all these years building this business and I can't get anything out of it. It's stuck in my balance sheet. It's stuck here, but it's a good business.
Right.
And the only time I'm going to be able to enjoy it is maybe when it's too late.
Right.
And so I think, certainly maybe there's some opportunities here. I'd love to talk to you at Watchdog Capital or get an introduction there, because I know some business owners could be really interested in this, who just are looking at, do I sell my business or do I keep my business? That's what they're looking at versus alternative solutions. And
you have your cake and eat it too with this. And you can get strategic. You could do around, depends on the size of the business. You do $1 million round, you get one strategic investor to take half of it for 500,000, give them a board seat. There's all kinds of things that are really additive to your business.
Yeah, no, I love that. And Rich, it speaks to, one of the desires I had, and we talked about this before, was helping small business owners get liquidity for what they've built.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious. I've heard a number of things that you've talked about in this conversation. I've kind of heard them, but they've been more on the fringes. I have to say, you're the most educated, most passionate person who I've spoken with, most confident person I've spoken with on some of the topics that you speak about. If some of our listeners, I'm assuming, are probably like me going, wow, Brice sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And you threw out the, WTF happened in 1971. What are some other things people could self-educate on? What are the Google searches you would recommend? What are the videos people should watch if they wanted to learn more about how you've acquired your base of confidence?
Sure. I like to zoom out and ask the big picture questions, like what is going on in the world? What is morality? What is good and evil? What are we here for? Is there God? What does God mean? These kind of things. The more you zoom out, I think that kind of leads you on a good path of, especially asking about what is good and evil, what is morality? Because that, I think, leads you down a path to things like sound money. The high level philosophy about what is the nature of force. When is it okay to point a gun in somebody's face? Because that's what the state does. The state isn't here to be a voluntary organization. They're not giving you suggestions. They're giving you mandates, and those mandates are backed by force. So understanding the nature of force, I think, is crucial for us as moral humans, as people who care about our fellow human, who want to, presumably, hopefully everybody wants to do good and be a good person, to be a good person in their life and do good for our world and figure out what our purpose is. How do we be an example for our children and grandchildren? What kind of world do we leave? How do we make it better? And I think that comes down to a lot of the basics. You don't hit people, and you don't punch people, and you don't kill people, and you don't hurt people if they don't hurt you, especially. And that comes to a philosophy of politics. And I've adopted a philosophy, a voluntarist philosophy, that says I don't have the right to point a gun at somebody or have harm done in my name unless they've initiated aggression. And that seems like kindergarten level ethics. Everybody should be like, well, of course. But it doesn't work that way, because the reality of the current system is 99% of what people push on both sides of the aisle, Republican, Democrat, it violates that. It's force, and it's boots on heads, and it's guns in faces. Eric Garner was killed because he had loose cigarettes. He was selling loose cigarettes because some authoritarian tyrant sat at the office and said uttered those horrible words, there ought to be a law. And those words, there ought to be a law, have killed a lot of people. And it's a very, very dangerous thing. The state has killed 300 million of its own people in the last 100 years. Governments, that doesn't even include they've killed more of their own people. Think about this. The institution of government itself has killed more of its own people than wars with others. So more governments around the world killed their own people, their own people. So you have to really question the legitimacy of this whole thing. So that leads me down to the path of free markets and freedom. At a long, long journey. It begins with that, asking those big questions. What is money? What is morality? What is good? What is evil? What are we here for? What kind of people do we want to be? I think for most people, that will lead down a path of saying you can't do violence and aggression to people. And if you can't, then the whole system doesn't work. You need a newer system, a system based on voluntarism and peace and freedom and non-aggression. And you got to search out ways like Bitcoin that do this without a shot fired. Bitcoin can displace the money system and reduce a lot of that evil. Fiat is an evil system. It enables us to drop bombs all over the world and drone bomb people without accountability, with wild abandon. We can go on military misadventures in Afghanistan to the tune of trillions of dollars, and we can put more people in prisons than the Soviets had in gulags because of forbidden plants that 70% of the population don't even think should be forbidden. It allows great evils. So you got to look from the big, big, big picture. And so I would Google terms like voluntarism, free markets. I'd look at Ron Paul. I'd look at the roots of free market economic thinking, Milton Friedman, Saif Din Amos he's a Bitcoiner. He wrote the Bitcoin Standard, and he wrote a maybe even better book, the Fiat Standard, which talks about all the problems. Or he can't, even his big thick book can't cover all the problems with fiat, but it covers a lot of them. There's a lot of good speakers. The Bitcoiners talk a lot about these issues. I'm a big believer in freedom as a foundation, and I say this to Republicans, Democrats, socialists. I think that these core values of not harming our fellow man are absolutely crucial for us to be a moral society. We just can't do it. And the current way of life and the current system, it just doesn't honor that. It's a very violent and destructive system that I fear could get worse. So not to sound preachy, but I'd say that's a great foundation. Just thinking about these issues of voluntarism, the non-aggression principle. That's another thing I'd Google. What works? When is it okay to point a gun in somebody's face? And would you want your worst political enemy, whether it's Pelosi or Trump, would you want them to have that power? These are the questions I think that lead us down the right path, the straight path, hopefully.
Thank you for that. Talk to us about what party you are running with. And I think you just talked about some of the things that you believe in terms of your platform, but what party are you running with? And then let's close with, if people wanted to get more of you, how would they go about doing that?
Thanks. So I'm running as a Liberty Republican. So I'll have to win the Republican GOP primary, which is September 13th. So if you're in New Hampshire, definitely vote September 13th. Independents and Republicans can vote, and I need those independents because I think I appeal to the most independents, as well as libertarians and free staters. So winning that is the first step, and then comes the general election in November, which is very, very, very winnable because my opponent is quite weak and unpopular, and her party is unpopular, and I think people are ready. And this is sort of a purple state. It's very, very likely that we can flip this, and I think I can bring in the broadest section of people. So yeah. And by Liberty Republican, I mean like a Ron Paul Republican. It's a little different than, there is many shades of red. It's been very interesting. The Republican Party is quite diverse. There's people who love Trump. There's people who don't. There's quite a few different people here in New Hampshire. They like the governor, some don't. There's libertarians. There's free staters. There's Liberty Republicans. So I think I can sort of unite them all. But my personal philosophy is Liberty Republican, which is like a Ron Paul Republican. I believe in voting no on government expansion and tyranny and government control and increase in taxes and any kind of other thing. And I vote yes on preserving and protecting the Constitution and having a limited government limited in scope, limited in violence, and limited in what we're doing. And I think we desperately need that. As a senator, you can't do much. I wish I could go down there and promise that I'm going to get rid of the TSA and for-profit prisons and legalize marijuana and a bunch of other things. But you just don't have that much power as a senator. You're just one of 100 voices, and hopefully I could be a message sent down there from New Hampshire to say, this is what happens when you guys overstep. We're going to send Brice Fenton down there to cause trouble. And that's what I would do. I'd definitely cause trouble. Vote no, absolutely without compromise. No compromise ever on these kind of things. And so, yeah, if people want to get in touch with me, I'm very accessible, especially if you're New Hampshire. I don't want a single person in New Hampshire to not be able to contact me. I have my phone number is out there. I'm accessible in a lot of ways. I'm out in public all the time. I do a lot of public clubhouses and things like that, so people can ask questions. BriceFenton.com is the website, and that has all my Twitter handle and all that kind of stuff. And it's been a fun process. I love talking to voters, especially people who disagree with me, by the way. Most people won't do that in a campaign. And all the political experts, they say, don't talk to anybody who disagrees with you. Just find your very narrow base who exactly agrees with you. But I think these are important times. And if I'm wrong, I want to know I'm wrong. And if I'm right, I want to convince you why I think I'm right. And so I'm more than happy to talk to people, even people who disagree with me. I think it's fun. We're all in this together. We got to figure out what's right. Because if I'm right, you don't want to risk being hungry. I think we have to get this right, or our future for our kids is going to be an unrecognizable country.
Brice, that sounds like a great place to end, and I think we can all agree on that, on the future for our kids. So awesome. Thank you for being on, and much appreciated. Thanks for all your sharing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You guys have a good one.
Best of luck in September.
Thank you.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
So, Rich, I'm very curious. I asked you if you'd been to what WTF happened in 1971. There's a lot of conversations. I haven't read the Fourth Turning yet, but I did look at that video, The World Changing Order by Ray Dalio, that I thought was fascinating. That if you haven't watched that, I'd encourage you to go watch it. I'm curious as to how this conversation struck you in terms of, look, there's an epic change going on here. And is that something you've been thinking about at all, or is it something kind of new and novel to your thought process?
I would say it's something on the back burner in the way back of my mind, and I'm hopeful that all of the changes that he's speaking about don't happen. Yep. Because you and I have our plans from now until post-retirement. As a financial planner I know who was on that, Dennis, who was on our podcast, says post-retirement, that's i.e. death. Yep. We have our plans set between now and post-retirement, and it'd be pretty unsettling if we became the $100 trillion bill country. And that would certainly upset an apple cart, not obviously just for us. So the things that I often think about are, if something like that happens, I think I'm going to be worried about an awful lot more than what's happening with my money. Mm-hmm. And so is everybody else. And I think it's concerning. I think it's scary stuff to think of that. There aren't a lot of safe, secure places to consider on a world of chaos and disorder where nobody really knows what will happen next. So the majority of time I go, whatever's happening out there, it doesn't change what I need to do today. I need to serve the people who I serve in our business. I need to be the man who I want to be in my home, with my wife, with my children, with my business associates, with you, my friends. All of that stuff doesn't change what I need to do day to day on the man who I want to be. So that's where I find peace in the consideration of the potential chaos.
Yeah. See, I look at it a few different ways, right? It's education, right? A lot of education. Part of the reason you and I do this podcast is we learned a ton on this conversation ourselves. So it sharpens our own saw. It opens our paradigm to what is going on. What are people talking about? What's happening? I mean, a lot of things that Brice talked about resonate with me. I see it. There's no question that that, there's a lot of chaos going on. There's a lot of change going on in the world. Technology is advancing so quick. The demographics, the baby boomers are going, and there's not as many kids being born today. A lot of things are changing. And I don't think the doom and gloom scenario, Rich, is potentially our lifetime. But you guys ended this right. Like, what about the future generations and what's going on with them, and what impact can we make there, and how do we protect ourselves and our future generations? And I think it boils down to really three things in my mind, right? You can only control what you can control. I can only control what I can control. Obviously, Brice is trying to really make a bigger impact in the grand scheme of things, and what he sees, which I admire, right? That message, I'm going to go try and do more than my fair share and participate at a higher level. Very admirable for Brice. But the way I look at it is execute what you can execute today. Have very good risk management in place. Like, don't go bet the farm on a cryptocurrency of the day, and you can't afford to do that right now. But also diversification is massive, right? You shouldn't have all in equities. You shouldn't have all in Bitcoin. You shouldn't have all in a crypto coin or Dogecoin. You shouldn't have all in bonds. You should be very, very, very well diversified. You mentioned earlier, along the lines of diversification is dollar cost average, and keep investing, because if the market goes down, you're investing down, and it's probably going to go back up. And you need really good financial advisement is kind of, I guess, my point. And the last point that he made that I thought was awesome, and it's really part of my agenda, is the best thing you can invest in is yourself. Because yourself can go anywhere. Yourself can build value in something by your energy, not depending on a company to hit their metrics at the end of the quarter. Investing in yourself is the best thing you could possibly do. Not relying on a company, not relying on somebody else to provide for you. It's invest in yourself as an entrepreneur and build something that can have value. And furthermore, teach your kids and future generations to be entrepreneurs and build on their, what they can build on their own. I think that's a huge message that is part of what I believe to be true, which is, the best investment you'll ever make is the one in yourself.
I read something in the last, I don't know, it's either been the last couple of weeks, maybe last couple of months at most. That was Warren Buffett's advice. That a bunch of people said, hey, where can I put money? That's the safest place to put it with the most potential upside. And he said, invest in yourself.
Love it.
Be a better person, be a better leader, learn how to cook if that's what you want to do, but do something to invest in yourself that you'll never regret it. And I agree with that. And while you were talking, I was thinking of the quote that we've used on this podcast more than once, which is control what you can and influence the rest. So that's where my consideration continues to rest, John, is I can't control a lot of this stuff. And if I put too much thought into it, it runs a risk of paralyzing me of making good decisions about what I can control. So there are people like Brice, and thank goodness there are, that are going to go fight a fight on a bigger stage in potentially the U.S. Senate to hopefully make good decisions. Well, I frankly have my head down and I'm doing what I need to do to invest in myself and be the best man I can be.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, you can only do so much. You can go watch CNN all day long, and you're going to have an incredibly pessimistic view of what's going on in the world, or you can invest in yourself and be the best you can be, to your point. So I really, really love that. The other area, and the last area that I want to touch on here in this conversation that we didn't talk too much about, we talked about the Reg CF, regulation crowdfunding. I had never heard of this, Rich. I don't know why I've been so, uneducated in this one, but this is awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, the ability for a business to sell a percentage of their company with really no regulations preventing them from doing so, right? It doesn't fall under the Securities Act. You're not having to go list your company on the stock exchange, but you can actually sell to the public some shares in your company up to 5 million per year. So there's a lot of liquidity there. Brice touched on it. We didn't talk about it at all, is the potential future tokenization. And when you think tokenization, you think cryptocurrency instantly. But I think what's going to happen in the future is, and just to give you a wild example, your home is is really, will become a non-fungible token. People think of non-fungible tokens, NFTs, as a JPEG. Well, your home will be a non-fungible token of some sort that you may be able to sell pieces of it to people that can own a piece of it if you want to get some. But then when your home is sold, everybody can get their return. Same thing with a business. Like, you can tokenize your business and create the EU coin, for example. If we wanted to tokenize the Entrepreneurs United podcast, we'll tokenize the EU token, and we can sell shares, which they will get in the form of a tradable token with its unique identifier, just like your dollar that was backed by the silver certificate. They would get a unique, NFT, if you will, ownership of the EU podcast that they could resell on an open marketplace if people saw value in that particular token. So I think tokenization is coming. It's coming rapidly, and we didn't talk enough about it. And I don't know, I don't know when or how, but I do believe that is the future.
Yeah, I know you and I have talked about that more offline, off air, than we have on air. And you're certainly more educated on that than I am. I look at things like what Brice had said in terms of businesses to be able to invest in versus what tokens would I be able to buy a part of. And I love what he said there, which was businesses that do better in chaos. Like, you have the luxury brand knife and you have the hunting brand knife, invest in the hunting brand. Businesses that control their own supply chain. You brought up baby boomers coming out of the market. That's a fact. We should probably have a conversation or debate or a guest who comes on that says, what can we invest in as we know baby boomers are going to come out of the market and it's going to impact a bunch of things in a negative way? What can we predict it would impact in a positive way? And how do we be like Brice and get on the leading end of a trend like that?
Yeah. If you want to project where things are going, the one thing that's been a wide open awakening is demographics. If you want to go buy businesses, the best businesses to buy may be from the baby boomers who want to get out of their business. There's not enough people to buy them, even though they might be, oil grease or fences or, lumber or whatever it may be. Maybe the best businesses to buy. They're boring, but they're necessary for the future. Whereas if you look at it a different way, you may look at demographics and go, oh, I want to have a startup. I want to go where the technology is going, and I want to go build something more along that vein. You need to understand where demographics are and where they're going. And I think there's a fundamental shift going on there right now.
Well, and what I'm excited about is as some of the fundamental shifts happen over the next, say, 5 or 10 years, we'll be here together with more guests who come on to talk to us and our listeners about how to take best advantage for ourselves and our families and our next generation.